Listen, what you're about to hear is the kind of tea that changes how people look at reality TV forever. Fans are shocked, emotions ran high, and what started as a routine interview spiraled into one of the most jaw-dropping confessionals we've seen in years. Because Jessica Dime is finally speaking her truth, and she is not holding back. In a moment that nobody saw coming, Jessica Dime opened up about what really went down behind the scenes of love and hip-hop, and the name at the center of the storm? None other than Mona Scott Young. According to Jessica, years of silence, bottled-up resentment, and alleged disrespect finally exploded into a confrontation that would change her career forever. And when she says disrespect, she means moments that left her humiliated, sidelined, and questioning her own worth. Sources claim the tension had been building for seasons, but fans never saw what allegedly happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Jessica says words were exchanged, lines were crossed, and decisions were made that led directly to her being fired, without warning, without closure, and without a chance to defend herself. Emotions ran high as she recalled feeling betrayed by a franchise she helped build, while insiders whisper that producers were scrambling to contain the fallout. What makes this even messier? Friends allegedly took sides, family members begged her to stay quiet, and fans flooded social media demanding answers. Some say Jessica went too far. Others say she was silenced for speaking up. And now, with nothing left to lose, she's pulling the curtain all the way back. So buckle up, because this isn't just about a show anymore. This is about power, respect, and what happens when a reality star decides to stop playing nice. The cameras weren't rolling when Jessica Dime says everything really went left, and that's the part fans are shocked by the most. According to her, what the audience saw on screen was the watered-down version, the polished edit, the safe storyline. Behind the scenes, emotions ran high, tempers flared, and respect was allegedly thrown out the window. Jessica claims the tension had been building quietly for years, starting from the moment she felt like her voice stopped mattering in rooms where decisions were being made about her life. She recalls walking into meetings feeling hopeful, thinking this season would finally be different, only to walk out feeling small. Jessica says she noticed subtle changes first, calls not being returned, scenes being cut short, and conversations happening without her knowledge. She says she tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just business, but deep down she felt something was off. Friends close to her noticed the shift too, saying she was more withdrawn, more emotional, and constantly questioning her place on the show. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jessica describes being called into a private conversation that she believed would clear the air. Instead, she says it turned into a situation where she felt talked down to and dismissed. Her voice cracks when she explains how she tried to express her frustrations, only to feel like she was being labeled difficult for speaking up. According to her, the energy in the room was cold, and the power imbalance was impossible to ignore. She claims that when she finally stood her ground, that's when things escalated. Words were exchanged, tones were raised, and Jessica says she felt disrespected not just as a cast member, but as a woman who had poured years into the franchise. Sources close to the production allegedly say the room went silent after Jessica spoke her mind, with some staff members avoiding eye contact while others looked visibly uncomfortable. Jessica says she left that meeting shaken but proud of herself for finally saying what she'd been holding in. However, that pride didn't last long. Within days, she claims she started feeling iced out completely. No updates, no reassurance, just silence. She remembers checking her phone constantly, hoping for clarity, but instead receiving vague messages that left more questions than answers. Fans are shocked to hear her say that the official word about her future on the show didn't even come directly to her at first. Jessica claims she heard whispers through mutual contacts before anyone from the network reached out. When the confirmation finally came, she says it felt like a punch to the chest. She describes sitting alone, replaying every moment, wondering if standing up for herself had cost her everything. The emotional toll didn't stop there. Jessica says her family was left divided over the situation. Some urged her to stay quiet and protect future opportunities, while others encouraged her to speak her truth no matter the consequences. She remembers heated conversations at home, tears at the dinner table, and sleepless nights filled with anxiety about what was next. Friends from the industry reacted in different ways. Some distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with controversy, while others reached out privately, admitting they'd experienced similar treatment but never had the courage to say anything publicly. Jessica says those messages validated her feelings but also made her realize how deeply rooted the problem might be. As news of her exit spread, fans flooded social media with speculation. Some accused her of being ungrateful, while others defended her fiercely, calling out what they saw as unfair treatment. Jessica admits that reading the comments was overwhelming. She says she felt misunderstood by people who only knew the edited version of her story. What hurt the most, according to Jessica, was the narrative that she was difficult to work with. She insists that label was unfair and damaging, especially for a woman who prides herself on professionalism. She recalls moments where she went above and beyond, showing up sick, missing family events, and sacrificing her mental health for the show. She says the breaking point came when she realized she was grieving something that was already gone. The show wasn't just a job to her, it was a platform, a family, and a dream she'd worked hard to build. Letting go felt like losing a part of herself. Yet, even in that pain, Jessica hints that something inside her shifted. She started asking herself hard questions about self-worth, boundaries, and how much disrespect she was willing to tolerate for fame. She says that while being fired felt humiliating, it also forced her to confront truths she'd been avoiding for years. The silence that followed became a space for reflection, but it also set the stage for what would come next, because Jessica wasn't done talking, and the story was far from over. In the weeks after her exit, Jessica Dime says the reality of being cut off from love and hip-hop truly settled in. The phone stopped ringing, the routine disappeared, and the spotlight that once felt overwhelming suddenly went dark. She admits there were moments she questioned everything, replaying scenes in her head and wondering if she should have stayed quiet just a little longer. But at the same time, she says a different emotion started creeping in beneath the sadness: anger. That anger came from feeling erased. Jessica claims that once she was gone, it was as if her contributions never existed. Storylines she helped carry were rewritten, moments she lived through were reframed, and her name was barely mentioned. Fans are shocked to hear her say that watching the show afterward felt like watching strangers live out a version of her life without her consent. She says it felt intentional, like a message being sent. Behind closed doors, Jessica says she struggled financially more than people realize. Opportunities she thought were guaranteed suddenly fell through. Brand deals went quiet, appearances were cancelled, and conversations stopped mid-sentence once people realized she was no longer attached to the franchise. She says that's when she understood how much power the show really held and how disposable cast members could become overnight. During this time, Jessica says her relationship with friends became strained. Some accused her of burning bridges, telling her she should have played the game better. Others questioned why she was so emotional about a television show, minimizing the impact it had on her life. Those comments cut deep. She says people forget reality TV may look messy on screen, but the consequences off-screen are very real. One night, Jessica recalls scrolling through old messages and photos from her early days on the show. She remembers the excitement, the hunger, and the belief that she was building something bigger than herself. That nostalgia turned into grief, and she admits she broke down crying, feeling like she let her younger self down. But that same night, she says she made a decision not to let the narrative be written without her. That decision led to the first time she seriously considered speaking out publicly. Jessica says she wrestled with fear, knowing how powerful the industry could be and how quickly stories could be flipped against her. She worried about being labeled bitter, unstable, or attention-seeking. Her family was still divided, with some warning her that telling her side could make things worse. But then something unexpected happened. Jessica says she received a call from someone she deeply respected in the industry, someone who had no reason to lie. That person allegedly told her, "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." Hearing that changed everything. It confirmed that what she experienced wasn't isolated, and that silence was exactly what allowed these patterns to continue. As rumors began circulating online about her being fired for attitude issues, Jessica felt pushed into a corner. She says watching blogs speculate without knowing the truth made her feel powerless. Every headline felt like another layer of disrespect. Emotions ran high as she realized that staying silent was no longer protecting her, it was hurting her. Jessica describes the first time she hinted at the truth publicly as terrifying. Her hands were shaking, her voice unsteady, but she felt relief the moment the words left her mouth. Fans immediately reacted, flooding her comments with support, shock, and questions. Some shared their own stories of being silenced at work, turning her pain into something bigger than herself. Of course, not everyone was supportive. Jessica says she faced backlash almost instantly. Some accused her of lying, others said she was trying to stay relevant. The negativity weighed heavily on her mental health. She admits there were days she didn't want to leave the house, afraid of judgment and gossip. But she also noticed something else happening at the same time: people were listening. Former cast members allegedly began reaching out quietly, sharing similar experiences and thanking her for speaking up. Jessica says those private messages meant more to her than any public apology ever could. They reminded her that her voice mattered and that her story could create space for others to tell theirs. As the conversation grew louder, Jessica claims she felt pressure from multiple sides to stop talking. She hints at receiving indirect warnings, subtle reminders of how the industry works, and suggestions that she move on quietly. Instead of intimidating her, she says it fueled her determination. For the first time, she wasn't chasing approval. Jessica also opens up about how this period affected her identity. For years, she was introduced as a love and hip-hop star. Without that title, she felt lost. She had to rediscover who she was without cameras validating her existence. Therapy, prayer, and long conversations with herself became part of her healing process. She admits there were moments she missed the chaos, the attention, and even the arguments. Reality TV had conditioned her to believe drama equaled relevance. Unlearning that mindset was painful but necessary. She began focusing on motherhood, personal growth, and rebuilding her confidence away from the noise. Still, the unresolved feelings lingered. Jessica says she never received a real explanation, an apology, or closure. That lack of accountability sits heavy with her. She questions why speaking up is often punished while silence is rewarded. These questions continue to haunt her and push her forward at the same time. By the end of this chapter, Jessica makes one thing clear: she refuses to be portrayed as a cautionary tale. Instead, she wants her story to be a warning about what happens when power goes unchecked. And just as she was finding her footing again, another twist was already brewing, one that would bring old wounds back to the surface and force her to confront the past head-on. That next twist came when Jessica Dime says her name suddenly started circulating in conversations she wasn't even part of. Old clips resurfaced online, moments from past seasons taken out of context and reshared with new captions that painted her as aggressive and ungrateful. Fans were shocked at how quickly the narrative flipped again, and Jessica admits it felt like reopening a wound that never fully healed. She says it was clear someone wanted to remind her where she came from and why she should stay quiet. The timing couldn't have been worse. Jessica says she was finally beginning to feel stable again, mentally and emotionally, when the internet dragged her back into the chaos. People who hadn't mentioned her name in years suddenly had opinions. Podcasts discussed her downfall, bloggers speculated about secret blacklists, and strangers dissected her personality as if they knew her personally. Emotions ran high as Jessica tried to keep her composure while feeling attacked from all sides. She recalls one particular day when she received a screenshot that made her stomach drop. It was an alleged behind-the-scenes quote attributed to a high-level producer, suggesting Jessica was replaceable and difficult to manage. Jessica says reading that broke something inside her. She had given years of her life, sacrificed privacy, and endured public humiliation, only to be reduced to a few dismissive words. That was the moment she decided to stop protecting people who never protected her. Jessica says she sat down with a close friend and began recounting everything from the very beginning: no cameras, no filters, just raw truth. She cried, she yelled, and she admitted things she'd never said out loud before. According to her, speaking freely for the first time felt like reclaiming her power. As she became more open, more details started to spill. Jessica claims there were moments during filming where she felt intentionally provoked, pushed into emotional reactions that could later be used against her. She alleges that certain scenes were manipulated, conversations edited to change their meaning, and conflicts exaggerated to fit a storyline that no longer served her. Hearing herself say it out loud made her realize how normalized that behavior had become. She also addresses the idea that she should have been grateful no matter what. Jessica pushes back hard on that notion, saying gratitude should never require accepting disrespect. She explains how being a woman in that environment often meant walking a thin line between being entertaining and being labeled a problem. The family was left divided when she shared these thoughts publicly, with some relatives worrying she was reopening doors better left closed. Fans, however, reacted differently. Many praised her honesty, saying they could finally see the emotional toll behind the glamour. Messages poured in from women who felt seen and validated by her story. Jessica says those messages reminded her why she chose to speak out despite the backlash. Her pain was no longer just hers, it had become a mirror for others. But the drama didn't stop there. Jessica hints that after she began telling her story more openly, certain people attempted to rewrite history. Statements were made suggesting her exit was mutual, that she was offered chances she declined, and that there was no bad blood. Jessica calls those claims insulting. She says if that were true, she wouldn't have been left in the dark, scrambling for answers. She remembers feeling gaslit, like her reality was being questioned publicly while she was expected to smile and move on. That expectation triggered anger she had tried to bury. Jessica says she realized that silence had allowed others to control the narrative for too long. Speaking up wasn't about revenge, it was about survival. As she continued to share her perspective, she noticed a shift in herself. She became less afraid of losing access and more focused on protecting her peace. Jessica says she stopped measuring her worth by industry validation and started redefining success on her own terms. Still, the scars remained. Certain sounds, places, and even conversations triggered memories she wished she could forget. She opens up about motherhood during this time, explaining how her child became her anchor. Jessica says looking into her child's eyes forced her to think about legacy and boundaries. She didn't want to teach her child that enduring disrespect was the price of success. That realization strengthened her resolve to stand firm, no matter how uncomfortable it made others. Yet, there were moments of doubt. Jessica admits there were nights she questioned whether telling her story was worth the emotional exhaustion. The comments, the speculation, and the constant need to defend herself took a toll. She says she had to step back at times, choosing healing over headlines. Behind the scenes, she began working on new projects quietly, rebuilding her confidence away from the spotlight. Every small win felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been taken. She started surrounding herself with people who valued her beyond what she could provide on camera. That support system became crucial as the noise grew louder. The more she healed, the clearer things became. Jessica says she no longer seeks validation from the same spaces that once broke her. She accepts that some bridges are burned permanently and that not every story gets a clean resolution. Still, she refuses to let her experience be dismissed or minimized. As she reflects on everything, Jessica acknowledges that the industry thrives on silence and compliance. By choosing honesty, she disrupted that cycle, even if it came at a cost. She says she's learned that peace often comes disguised as loss and that walking away doesn't mean losing. Now, as she stands in this new chapter, Jessica makes it clear that she's not asking for sympathy. She wants accountability, transparency, and change. The story may have started on reality TV, but its impact reaches far beyond the screen. And even now, with so many unanswered questions still lingering, Jessica knows one thing for sure: her voice will never be taken from her again. As time passed, Jessica Dime says the conversation around her story only grew louder, but so did the resistance. She noticed how quickly support could turn into skepticism, how people who once applauded her courage began questioning her motives. Fans were shocked at how divided opinions became. Some believed every word she said, while others insisted there had to be more to the story. Jessica says that division hurt, but it also revealed how uncomfortable people become when the truth doesn't fit a clean narrative. She remembers attending an industry event months later, her first time stepping back into that world since everything happened. Walking into the room felt surreal. Conversations lowered as she passed by, eyes followed her movements, and she could feel the unspoken tension in the air. Some people hugged her warmly, whispering words of encouragement, while others avoided her completely. That contrast reminded her exactly why she had spoken out in the first place. Jessica admits there was a moment that night when she felt small again, like the old version of herself who constantly sought approval. But instead of shrinking, she stood taller. She says she realized that her presence alone made people uncomfortable because it represented a truth they didn't want acknowledged. That realization was strangely empowering. Soon after, Jessica says she was invited to speak on platforms she never expected. Not just entertainment blogs, but spaces focused on mental health, women's empowerment, and workplace accountability. She explains that sharing her story in those settings felt different. There was no need to perform, no pressure to exaggerate, just honesty. Emotions ran high during those conversations, and she admits she cried more than once, but each time felt lighter afterward. She also addresses the idea that she should have moved on by now. Jessica pushes back, saying healing doesn't follow a schedule, especially when the damage was public. She says people forget that while audiences move on to the next season, cast members are left dealing with the fallout long after the cameras stop. That disconnect fuels a lot of the pain reality stars experience in silence. Behind closed doors, Jessica says she continued unpacking how deeply the experience affected her self-esteem. There were moments she second-guessed her instincts, wondering if she had imagined certain slights or exaggerated situations in her mind. Therapy helped her understand that gaslighting can make you doubt even your strongest memories. Hearing a professional validate her feelings was a turning point. She recalls one session where she finally said out loud that she felt disposable. The word hung heavy in the room. For years, she had tied her value to how useful she was to others. Once that usefulness ended, so did the support. Recognizing that pattern was painful but freeing. Jessica says it allowed her to stop chasing spaces that never intended to protect her. Still, the past wasn't done with her. She hints at moments when old tensions resurfaced unexpectedly. Comments made in interviews, jokes disguised as shade, and subtle references that fans quickly picked up on. Each time her name trended again, it reopened the conversation. Jessica says she learned to choose when to respond and when to protect her peace, a balance she's still mastering. Family dynamics continued to evolve as well. Some relatives who once urged her to stay silent eventually admitted they were proud of her strength. Others still worried about long-term consequences. The family was left divided at times, but Jessica says she understands their fear came from love. Navigating those relationships required patience and grace she didn't always feel capable of giving. She also reflects on friendships lost along the way. People she once considered close faded out of her life without explanation. At first, that abandonment hurt deeply. Later, she saw it as clarity. Jessica says losing people who only valued her proximity to fame made room for more genuine connections. The loneliness she feared never came. Instead, she found peace in smaller circles. As she rebuilt, Jessica became more intentional about her image and her voice. She stopped oversharing for validation and started speaking with purpose. Every interview, every statement was a choice, not a reaction. That control over her narrative was something she'd never truly had before. She acknowledges that there are still unanswered questions surrounding her departure. She doesn't pretend to have closure, and she doesn't fake forgiveness. Instead, she focuses on acceptance. Some chapters end without explanations, and some people never take accountability. Accepting that reality has been one of her hardest lessons. Jessica also addresses the younger generation watching her journey unfold. She says she hopes her story serves as a reminder that success should never cost your dignity. Fame is temporary, but self-respect lasts longer. Those words resonate deeply with fans who grew up watching her on screen and now see her in a new light. As the noise slowly fades, Jessica finds comfort in knowing she survived something that tried to break her. She didn't come out unscathed, but she came out honest. She says that honesty is her armor now. No matter what is said about her moving forward, she knows her truth. Looking back, Jessica admits she wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, but she also wouldn't erase it. It forced her to grow, to question systems, and to choose herself in ways she never had before. The pain shaped her, but it didn't define her. And even now, as conversations continue and opinions remain split, Jessica stands firm. She's no longer fighting to be understood by everyone. She's focused on being understood by herself. The chapter that began with silence and disrespect has transformed into one of voice and resilience. And while the story may not have the ending people expect, Jessica Dime knows it's finally hers to tell. Even with all that growth, Jessica Dime says the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. Just when she thought the dust had settled, a casual comment made during a media appearance reignited everything. It wasn't even her name being said directly, but fans picked up on the undertone immediately. Within hours, clips were circulating, speculation exploded, and once again Jessica found herself trending for reasons she didn't choose. Emotions ran high as she watched strangers debate her life like it was still a storyline. She admits there was a brief moment where she considered clapping back publicly, saying everything she'd held back. The anger was there, bubbling under the surface, tempting her to unload years of frustration in one explosive response. But she stopped herself. Jessica says she realized reacting impulsively would only pull her back into a cycle she'd worked so hard to escape. That pause, that moment of restraint, showed her how much she'd changed. Instead, she chose to speak deliberately. When she finally addressed the situation, her tone was calm, controlled, and unapologetic. Fans were shocked by the maturity in her response. There was no yelling, no accusations, just clarity. She spoke about boundaries, about how certain wounds don't heal just because time passes, and about how silence should never be mistaken for weakness. That response shifted public perception in ways she didn't anticipate. Even some critics admitted they saw her differently. Jessica says that moment confirmed something important: growth doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like choosing peace in the face of provocation. Behind the scenes, however, she was still processing the emotional aftershocks. She opens up about how trauma doesn't disappear just because you've healed parts of it. Certain triggers still brought back the same tightness in her chest, the same feeling of being cornered. Acknowledging that reality helped her stop shaming herself for not being over it yet. Jessica also reflects on the concept of loyalty, especially in the entertainment industry. She says she once believed loyalty meant staying silent, protecting people even when they hurt you. Now she defines loyalty differently. Loyalty, to her, means being honest with yourself first. It means not sacrificing your mental health to maintain access or approval. As her perspective shifted, so did her goals. Jessica began envisioning a future that didn't revolve around validation from networks or producers. She started thinking long-term, about ownership, independence, and control. Those thoughts scared her at first because they required stepping fully into the unknown. But fear, she says, no longer dictates her choices. She shares how motherhood continued to ground her during this phase. Her child became her reminder that legacy matters more than relevance. Every decision she made, every statement she released, she asked herself one question: is this something I'd be proud of my child seeing one day? That question became her compass. There were also moments of unexpected reconciliation. Jessica hints that some people from her past reached out privately, acknowledging mistakes without making excuses. Those conversations didn't erase the pain, but they offered something close to peace. She learned that accountability doesn't always come publicly, and sometimes that has to be enough. Not all interactions were positive. She says there were still attempts to minimize her experience, to frame it as drama she should be grateful for. Those moments reminded her why she stopped explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She says not everyone deserves access to your story. As time went on, Jessica noticed something surprising. The fear that once controlled her decisions started to fade. She no longer worried about being blacklisted or labeled difficult. Losing what she once feared losing taught her she was stronger than she ever realized. That realization was liberating. Fans continued to engage with her story, not just as spectators but as participants. They shared how her honesty helped them leave toxic jobs, speak up in unhealthy relationships, and set boundaries with family. Jessica says hearing those stories made everything she went through feel purposeful. Her pain had become a catalyst for others. She also acknowledges the complexity of public storytelling. Once you share your truth, it takes on a life of its own. People interpret it through their own experiences, biases, and expectations. Jessica learned to release control over how her story was received. She says peace came when she stopped trying to manage every narrative. Financial stability slowly returned as she diversified her work. Projects rooted in authenticity felt more fulfilling than anything she'd done before. She no longer felt pressured to perform a version of herself for ratings. Every opportunity was aligned with who she truly is, not who she was expected to be. Still, she doesn't pretend the journey was smooth. There were setbacks, moments of self-doubt, and days where old insecurities resurfaced. Healing, she says, is not linear. Some days you feel empowered, other days you feel exhausted. Learning to honor both states was part of her growth. Jessica also speaks about forgiveness, clarifying that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness means releasing the hope that someone will become who you needed them to be. Letting go of that expectation was one of her most painful lessons, but also one of the most freeing. As she stands now, Jessica no longer introduces herself by her past affiliations. She defines herself by her resilience, her honesty, and her refusal to be silenced. The woman she is today would not recognize the woman who once begged for respect in rooms where it was never intended to be given. She understands now that being fired wasn't the end of her story, it was the beginning of a different one. A story not controlled by edits, contracts, or power dynamics. A story rooted in truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable. Looking ahead, Jessica says she's open to new chapters but not at the cost of her peace. She's learned to walk away from anything that requires her to shrink. Success, in her eyes, now means alignment, not applause. And as the noise continues to fade into the background, Jessica Dime remains steady. She's no longer reacting to the past, she's building beyond it. The fire that once burned her now fuels her. And while the industry may remember her for controversy, she knows herself as something much more powerful, a woman who chose her voice over her fear and never looked back. Even now, Jessica Dime says she sometimes catches herself thinking about how differently things could have gone if respect had been present from the beginning. Not fame, not money, just basic human respect. She reflects on how many moments she brushed off red flags, telling herself it was part of the game. Looking back, she realizes those small moments were warnings she chose to ignore because she didn't want to seem ungrateful or difficult. She talks about how the reality TV machine conditions you to normalize chaos. Yelling becomes content, tears become storylines, and pain becomes entertainment. Jessica admits there were times she played into it, thinking that was the only way to survive. But survival came at a cost. She says the constant pressure to be on slowly chipped away at her sense of self. There's a moment she describes vividly, one that still sticks with her. She was filming an emotional scene, exhausted and overwhelmed, when she realized no one in the room cared how she felt once the cameras stopped. That realization hit harder than any argument ever could. It was the moment she understood the difference between being valued and being used. After leaving that environment, Jessica says silence became both her enemy and her teacher. Without constant noise, she was forced to sit with her thoughts. Some days, the quiet was unbearable. Other days, it was healing. She learned how much of her identity had been wrapped up in external validation and how uncomfortable it felt to exist without it. She opens up about the guilt that followed her for a long time. Guilt for walking away, guilt for speaking up, guilt for not speaking up sooner. She says women are often conditioned to carry guilt that doesn't belong to them, especially when they disrupt systems that benefit others. Unlearning that guilt was a slow process but an essential one. Jessica also reflects on how public perception can become a prison. Once people decide who you are, it's hard to escape that image. She says there were moments she felt trapped by a version of herself that no longer existed. Trying to prove she had grown only made her feel more misunderstood. Eventually, she stopped trying. She shares that one of the hardest parts was accepting that some people would never hear her truth without filtering it through their own biases. That acceptance didn't come easily. It required letting go of the need to be believed by everyone. Jessica says peace finally came when she realized she didn't owe clarity to people committed to confusion. As she continued to rebuild, Jessica became more intentional about her boundaries. She learned to say no without over-explaining. She stopped answering questions that felt invasive. She protected her energy fiercely, even when it meant disappointing others. That shift changed her life more than any public statement ever could. She also talks about the unexpected grief that comes with growth. Outgrowing old dreams, old versions of yourself, and old relationships can feel like loss. Jessica says she mourned the life she thought she would have, even as she built a better one. Both emotions existed at the same time, and learning to hold them together was part of her healing. Fans continued to watch her journey closely. Some rooted for a comeback to reality TV, hoping to see her reclaim her spot. Jessica understands that curiosity but says returning to the same environment without change would betray everything she learned. She's not closed off to opportunities, but she's no longer desperate for them. She addresses the misconception that speaking out means holding on to bitterness. Jessica says she's not bitter, she's aware. Awareness changed how she moves, how she trusts, and how she protects herself. Bitterness would have kept her stuck. Awareness set her free. There were moments she considered writing everything down, telling her story in full detail. She still hasn't decided if she will. Part of her wants to, part of her wants to keep certain things sacred. She's learned that not every truth needs to be shared publicly to be valid. Jessica also acknowledges that the people she speaks about are human too. That doesn't excuse harm, but it reminds her not to let anger consume her. She refuses to let resentment shape her future. Choosing peace doesn't mean pretending nothing happened, it means refusing to relive it every day. She speaks candidly about trust, admitting it doesn't come easily anymore. Betrayal leaves scars that don't fade quickly. But she hasn't closed her heart. She's simply more selective about who she lets in. Trust, for her now, is built slowly and intentionally. As her life settled into a new rhythm, Jessica found joy in simplicity. Moments away from the spotlight felt grounding. Laughter with loved ones, quiet mornings, and personal milestones meant more than trending topics ever did. She says those moments reminded her of who she is beyond public opinion. She also reflects on how resilience isn't about being unbreakable. It's about breaking and still choosing to rebuild. Jessica broke in ways she never expected, but each time she put herself back together with more intention. The cracks became part of her story, not something to hide. Now, when she looks back at the version of herself who felt powerless, she feels compassion, not shame. That woman did the best she could with what she knew at the time. Honoring that version instead of criticizing her has been one of her most healing practices. Jessica understands that her story will always be debated. Some will sympathize, some will doubt, and some will move on entirely. She's made peace with that reality. The goal was never universal approval, it was personal freedom. She knows now that being silenced didn't destroy her. It refined her. It taught her discernment, strength, and self-respect. Lessons she carries into every space she enters. As this chapter continues to close, Jessica Dime stands rooted in her truth. Not defensive, not apologetic, just honest. She no longer measures her worth by how loudly she's celebrated or how widely she's accepted. She measures it by how aligned she feels with herself. The story that began with disrespect and dismissal has evolved into one of clarity and self-possession. And while the world may still have opinions, Jessica has something far more valuable now, peace she fought hard to earn and a voice she will never give away again. So now that you've heard Jessica Dime's side of the story, the real question is this: what do you think? Was she wrong for finally speaking up, or was she pushed into silence for far too long? Fans are shocked, emotions are still running high, and the conversation is far from over. This story has exposed how messy the reality TV world can get when power, ego, and silence collide, and there are still so many unanswered questions lingering in the air. Do you believe Jessica was disrespected behind the scenes? Do you think being fired was retaliation for standing her ground? Or do you feel there's another side we still haven't heard yet? The comments section is where this conversation continues, and your opinion matters more than ever. The family was left divided, friendships were tested, and careers were changed, but the truth often lives somewhere between the headlines. If this story made you see reality TV differently, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button to let us know this type of real, unfiltered storytelling matters. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss when another shocking story breaks, because trust us, this won't be the last time a reality star decides to pull the curtain back. And most importantly, drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you stand. Were Jessica's actions justified, or should some things stay behind the scenes? Do you think the industry will ever change, or is this just how the game is played? Your voice keeps these conversations alive. Stay locked in, stay curious, and remember, every reality story has two sides, but only one truth.